Welcome to Spider-Verse Minute, the tri-weekly podcast where we watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 1 minute at a time. I'm Caroline Slater.
And I'm her brother Sean.
And today we are discussing Minute 42. It begins with Miles questioning Peter and ends a minute later with Peter glitching out.
And what did you title this minute?
I have titled this one, A Really Good Guess. So the minute picks up. Unless you wanted to start this, I don't know how you.
No, you go ahead.
The minute picks up with the cutoff line, which just to remind everybody is that then why are you? And just Miles just rattles off like, then why aren't you dead? Why is your hair different? And this is my favorite question. And why is your body a different shape?
Yeah. And then Peter's just like, yeah, pretty sure you just called me fat. He's like, no.
It was pretty fast now. I also love Peter's like jab back, which is you're wanting to talk. Most superheroes don't wear their own merch. However, it did make me think. He says most superheroes. Does that mean there are superheroes who do wear their own merch? And then I remembered Deadpool exists. I'm like, oh yeah, no, there's totally superheroes who wear their own merch.
I like then Miles goes in and tries to rattle off a bunch of different things. And he's, are you a ghost? Are you a zombie? And then he's like, wait, am I a zombie?
Yeah. I want to know what his thought process there was, because I wrote that down too. It's like, what do you think happened?
I also like the gag of, quick guesses and then like a really in-depth correct guess of like, just like, ghost, no, zombie, no. Are you, and then, are you from a parallel universe where things are different? Yeah.
And I love Peter's reaction, like, wow, that was really a guess? It was really just a guess?
Yeah, and I like how, he says it like, oh yeah, we just learned it in physics because, at the beginning of the movie, we're watching Dr. Octavia talking about parallel universes in the Collider in his physics classroom, which I thought was a great little, like, they didn't have to make that class physics that, like, that stuff was happening in the background, but, like, it makes it that much better that it's, this could have been an easy throwaway line, like, oh yeah, we were, learning about it in physics, whoop-de-doo, and then just having that, like, put a smile on my face.
Yeah, it's great because that moment earlier, and we talked about it when we did that minute too, but it serves for great, amazing foreshadowing. It makes this connection really well, and it's a cool, like, almost callback. Like, oh, hey, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, oh, really? You learned about that in physics? Like, it makes sense, too, with the school. Like, they showed that the school's for, like, super smart kids. So it would make sense that, like, even though Miles is only in middle school, that they're talking about quantum theory.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, because it sounds like you might have an answer for this.
17.
How did Peter get out of those bindings?
Well, easy. We were watching the hands. You need to watch the... Or, sorry. Let me try that again.
Go for it.
It's easy. We were watching the mouth, not the hands. Which... I do love that line. Like,
it's a great line.
So I think, I think he was just, like, there was probably a knot that he was able to, like, loosen up just enough, and then because of that, like, I bet Miles ended up, like, tying a bunch of things together instead of, like, wrapping them around it individually, and so once he got, like, whatever knot needed to be untied, like, everything else just became loose. But, yeah, his, like, first lesson, watch the mouth, or don't watch the mouse, watch the hands. Like, that really reminded me of, like, in football and in wrestling when we're always told to watch the hips because hips don't lie. Because if when people are running or doing any sort of movement, they can dance around all they want with their feet, but wherever their hips go, that's where the rest of their body is going to go. And so this was very reminiscent of that, like, kind of, and the same thing with, magicians have the same sort of thing, is that misdirection is, make sure you know what you're watching.
It's also very similar to stage combat, because I want to throw stuff in here too.
Yeah.
Is the whole thing about stage combat is the illusion of violence. So our whole thing is to be a bit more over the top, especially when you're using swords.
Yeah.
I mean, same with non-armed too, but especially when you're using swords, like, you'll use very fancy moves that are actually very ineffective in an actual sword fight because it takes too long.
Yeah.
But it helps tell the story, or it's like, it's a good way to just like, here, I'm going to distract the audience with my great sword movement while my partner gets ready to do something else.
Yeah.
Like, it's used in theater a lot.
Watch the flourish so that you don't watch the other guy, like, obviously getting into place.
Yes. Watch the flourish so you don't see the other person slapping their chest to make the punch noise. Like, it's things like that, or it's like, yes, keep an eye on the amazing dancing people so you don't see costume change happening in the background, and all of a sudden, like, oh, it was a magical transformation.
Yeah.
Like, it's things like that. It's a great line.
Yeah, and I thought this was, this is also a great first meeting for the two characters, really. Like, first time they're able to talk to each other.
I was going to say, what, you don't think The Shocking is a great first meeting? I think it's an amazing first
I usually don't think the first time I meet someone, like, a great way to get off on the right foot is to knock them unconscious. I think it's better to tie them up and start interrogating them.
Okay. Traditional.
But it is, it's a great way to kind of show off their two personalities. You really see Miles, like, hopping around and like, very kid-like.
Mm-hmm. I was just gonna say, I also want to just give a shout out to the voice actors. I'm not 100% sure on how they recorded the voices on this, because there's a few ways it can be done. And each one has a strength and each one has a weakness. So the more traditional way to get voice actors to record is they'll have them in rooms individually. So it'll just be Peter's voice actor in that room, and he'll just read off a bunch of his lines, and then he'll do it in different inflections and stuff, and that's the more traditional way to do voice acting. So you're not working off anybody, which you tend to do in acting. That's helped with a lot of the emotion. You have to trust the director to get the read they want. But there have also been movies and shows as well that will have all the voice actors in one room, and they'll talk and record with each other, and you can get a bit more of a... Natural's not the right word, but a more of a... It
feels more realistic.
Organic, I think is the better word. A more organic performance from the actors, because they actually are bouncing back and forth, and you don't have to worry about, like, oh, these characters have to talk over each other. How are we gonna, like, you don't have to worry about layering because they're in the same room, you just talk. One of my favorite movies that has done that, and it was really the first time I ever heard of that technique happening. I'm like, more movies should do this, but I also, again, there's weaknesses to it, is Tale of Despereaux. The way they did a lot of those scenes was they wanted it a more organic, or more like back and forth between the characters. So they had them record in the same room. So I don't know how they did it here, but if they did it in the same room or if they did it separately.
I believe most of it was in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they did some ADR, after the fact,
mm-hmm.
outside the same rooms. But they were talking about how, and we mentioned it in when Miles' dad picks him up in the police car in the mm-hmm. cruiser. They recorded that, like, sitting in that seating arrangement.
That's right.
So it makes sense if they did it for that, to, like, have them do it for other mm-hmm. scenes as well. Now this one was probably just them, like, facing each other. They probably didn't have, one of the guys tied up. Yeah.
I just wanted to bring it up because the back and forth between Miles and Peter is so good.
Yeah.
And whether that is just based off of a director giving them great directions on their own and getting great takes, or if it's the fact that the actors just had great back and forth in the studio, is it's a great job. That's my point.
Yeah. I also thought that this like the animators do a really good job of enhancing the voice actors in this.
Oh, definitely.
Because they definitely made Miles feel like a kid in this, where he's mm-hmm. bouncing around. He still looks a little awkward and clumsy, but, like, is excited to
1,000 questions per minute.
Yeah. And I loved, like, at one point as he's trying to follow Peter around, like, keep facing him as they're rotating,
Mm-hmm.
he does this little just like hop to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the I forget if it was in the director's or animator's commentary, but one of them said like, oh, we kind of wanted him to feel a bit like Bambi, in that sort of like bouncing around but like also awkward at the same time. And I thought they did a good job of capturing that. And they were even saying like this was an extra difficult shot to do because it was rotating around, but you also had like the lighting where one side was dark and one side was light, and you had to figure out where to place those lights in the room properly. And they had all of those ropes on Peter, and those are also hard to animate properly, because it's a lot of small cloth simulation, and like a lot of independent cloth simulation, which is very difficult to get done in a realistic way. So yeah, they were saying just how that was, this was one of the more difficult things to get right, and the fact that it turned out so well is
I also
awesome.
just realized not only did they have to worry about like one side of the room being lit really well, but like that lighting also has it's multiple sources. It's not like a single source, which complicates things even more. Like that's already hard to do when you're just focusing on single light part to get that right, or like, but you put multiple sources in there, and it's like, oh gosh, that's complicated.
Yes, very, very complicated. Those, I know, I always hated in my animation, like in my computer graphics classes, when we had to deal with multiple light sources. It was always a lot easier to just make the sky produce light. And like we talked about the different ways of like a lot of times, this was more in like focusing on games, but like a lot of times if there's a sun, literally the way you calculate light is just to make the whole sky produce light and calculate it that way instead of trying to do a single like point sun of light, because the way the sun like functions is it's so far away it acts in the same exact way as just a sheet of light, like a wall of light coming down, versus having like a single light bulb that's a lot closer and directed, and having to like calculate the way that bounces around. So it was always a lot easier when it's like, okay, one source of light, it's just a wall. Make it do that.
Although I did bring this up and I want to bring it up now, like I brought up that they have multiple sorts of lights, but now it just makes me question, why does Uncle Aaron have so many lights?
It looks like it's the various lamps that are around his apartment.
Okay, because they're set up almost like spotlight lights, like stage lights. So
it's actually really cool.
Uncle Aaron have stage lights.
Yeah, the one on the kitchen counter is just like a normal like side table light laid on its side, and then the lampshade, like the shade, is tilted up that way, and then there's another one on the floor that looks like a desk light that you would tilt down that's just tilted up. And so it just seems like he's got them all angled, and you just happen to be looking directly into the light part of it.
That's clever.
That you don't normally look at.
That you don't.
Because it's really bright and not fun to look at. And then the last thing I have is when after Peter works his magic and releases all of the light the ropes, when he jumps down the fire escape, he glitches, and this is the second time we see something glitch.
Yes.
The first time is with the spider in the subway.
The only other thing I have, and it's the last thing I have, is right before that glitch when he's like leaving out the window. Well, there's two things actually. I lied because I just remembered this. So first off, when he kicks the punching bag, which is not what you're supposed to do, Peter. It's a punching bag, not a kicking bag.
Yeah.
And Miles sits into the door. First off, Miles' shoe flies off.
Flies off. Yeah.
Which made me chuckle. But then the second thing that Peter does that we see later, but I kind of like it cool that they do it here, is that he shoots a web and covers Miles' mouth. Yeah,
they do the web, like, what's that called? Gag, I guess.
Web gag? Yeah, web gag.
Yeah, the web gag, that's a gag. Yay, double meaning words. But yeah, I do like that little power, and they use it a couple times in the comics and whatnot, and it's just Like, that would not be a fun thing to have get shot to your face, especially for someone with facial hair. I imagine that would just get all stuck up in their hair and whatnot.
You would have spider
Not
webs
fun.
in your beard for so long.
Yeah, I think it dissolves pretty quickly. Like, that's usually something they kind of bring up, is it dissolves after an hour or two. But yeah, I could still, like, that would not be fun for those couple of hours that it's stuck in there.
That's the last note I have for this minute. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's everything I had as well. So thank you for joining us this week and finishing out today with minute 42. If you want to contact us, you can reach us on Twitter at SpiderVerseMin, M-I-N, or reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Spiderverse Minute. And if you want to send an email, you can shoot one over to podcast@spiderverseminute.com.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.